This video is going to look at structures where we create arrays of structures and then structures that have arrays inside them. So we start out with creating a simplified struct for our student where it simply has an ID for the student and a single grade. We create a second structure which is called student multi-marks because it supports storing up to 10 marks for the students. It's got the ID and it's got double grades, which is now an array of 10. It also needs a count for the actual number of grades which are stored there because the real number of grades might be less than 10. Just because you allocate 10 spaces doesn't mean that you're going to use all of them. So we're going to use n marks to count how many marks are really stored in there. We start out by creating an instance of our student, and this is called the single grade class because this is this student struct which has just one grade in it. We're going to create an array and we're going to initialize it, and we're putting every instance of the structure inside its own set of curly brackets inside, and there's the student ID and there's the mark, the next student ID, the next mark, and so on. So that is an array. Now let's take a look at how we would print those. Down here, I'm going to run a for loop because I created 3 of those. I'm going to run a for loop where I goes from 0, 1, 2. And within there, I'm going to print out the ID and then the grade. And to access the ID, because it's in an array, I say single grade class. I use a subscript to indicate which member of the array we want. And once I've got that member of the array, it's a structure, so I use the dot notation to get at the ID field. I do exactly the same thing for the grade. I subscript the single grade class with the subscript I, and then I use the dot notation to get inside that structure to get the grade. So it really is an array of structures which are laid out in memory one after another, just like any other array. When we do the subscript, it accesses one member of the array, which is a structure, and then we use the dot notation to go inside it and access one of the fields. So it's really no different than anything we've done before. We're subscripting to get the member of an array, just like we did with an array of integers. And then because when we subscript, we actually get a structure, we have to use the dot notation to get one of the fields inside the structure. The second one we have is the one where the student actually has in its structure an array of marks, which means they can have more than one mark stored. So when we initialize this, I actually put down the student number, the number of marks, and then because this is an array initializer, I put it in its own set of curly brackets, and there's the 3 grades for this student. Similarly, 333 only has 2 grades, and then we provide 2 numbers, and 444 has 2, and we provide 2 numbers for it. So that's how we can initialize an array inside a structure, and we've got an array of one of those structures. Now let's look at how we would print it out. Printing this out is a little more complicated. So we've got our for loop, which is going to go through the array and access each one of the structures. And we're going to print out the student ID and then grades equals. To get the student ID, it's pretty much the same as what we did before. It is multi-class sub I dot ID, no different than what we did with a single class, because it's just a regular variable inside the struct. It gets a little more complicated once we want to print out the grades themselves because there are multiple grades. So because there's several grades, we need a for loop to do it. So now I'm going to run a for loop where j equals 0 and j is less than multi-class sub I dot n marks. And n marks counts the number of marks inside that particular structure. And so we're going to run j from 0 up to n marks minus 1. And for everyone, we are going to print out %.2LF for a floating point with 2 places past the decimal. And multiclass sub I dot grades, and gets us the grades field, but the grades field is actually an array, and we subscript it with j because the inner for loop is varying j. So for one student, the ith student, it is going to print out all of the grades. Let's run it and see how it works. So if we go back here, we see that we start out and we print out the first 3 students, and they're the single grade students, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and there's their grades exactly like it is over there in the initialization. Then I print out the multigrade students, and here they've got a differing number of grades. So if I just look at the first one, 222 has 44, 63, and 77. And it knows that because it's got the 3 over here that tells it that there are 3 grades to come. And it never knows how long an array is. You have to provide that information and store it somewhere. So you always have to count how many values are in an array if the array is not full. So that shows us how we can create arrays of structures, and then how we can put an array inside a structure, as well as creating arrays of structures which have arrays in them, and all those different combinations. So there you have it, everything about arrays and structures working together.